Good evening and welcome to the Upset Podcast. We're so happy you tuned in tonight. We're talking about Juneteenth and the gospel. Coming up next. Hey, once again, welcome back to the Upset Podcast. Thank you for tuning in this Sunday evening. We are so happy that you are with us, and I'm also happy to have these great people with me. Hey, guys.
Hey. Happy Sunday.
Hey.
Hola.
Happy Sunday. How's everybody? Yes,
we live
today. We live.
Nice.
Come in and say hello.
It's good to be alive.
Yes, it is. It is great to be alive. So, anything exciting happening?
Before we get to that,
yes,
summertime. It's hot. It's hot out there.
Listen,
before we get to that,
this heat is great.
I've just changed my. I want everybody to know I've changed my mind. I'd like to be considered to be the leader of this conference.
And we'll say to you, too late.
Has something happened?
Yeah, I feel like we just. I know you said you wanted to wait, Marlena, but the cat's out of the bag.
You don't care about my life. We just care about our president.
But we're gonna come back to it.
I love him much.
But go ahead. No, you know what? We have time.
It's out there now. Go ahead, Tosh. Go ahead.
What did you want to share?
I feel selfish now. Go ahead. We'll talk about him, then I'll talk about myself.
Oh, okay. Yes, we are here. Hello, Yanni. Thank you. Tiffany, her birthday is not China. Oh, yeah.
Belated birthday, Tiffany.
Birthdays in June.
I forgot her. I didn't wish her a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Tiff.
All you June babies. But yeah, that too, the announcement. I'm sure many of you, if you're watching this, you've probably seen it already, or heard the news that we do have a new president.
Hey,
Dr. Trevor Kinloch was elected today by our executive committee.
Let's go.
So we are welcoming him with open arms. We're excited about what happens next for Allegheny East Conference. And so, after this extensive process, this is where we land today. And we are very hopeful about our future at AEC.
Yeah, he is a true man of God.
Yes, he
true
is.
man of God.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Responsible for me being here too.
Does anyone else?
Me too, Marley.
Does anyone else take notice of the fact that the Washington, D.C. metro area seems to have an extraordinary amount of influence over the leadership of this conference at this point?
Yeah, I think that is definitely something that people have noticed as a trend. I don't necessarily know if they consider it a concern. That's key.
Let me tell you. Let me share with you briefly why it is a concern, and that is when any organization begins to identify itself by its institutions, then that organization has started to do what's called navel gazing and losing its sense of mission. Washington, D.C. is our institutional hub. And I am noticing that the conference is starting to swing in the direction of identifying itself by its institutional existence. And I'm wondering what that says about our sense of missiology. And it's just a wonder. I mean, this has nothing to do with personalities. It's just me wondering out loud. I mean, when you think about the fact the last several presidents traced themselves through Washington, D.C., all of the candidates this time around traced themselves through Washington, D.C. And I'm just wondering if the D.C. metropolitan area has become a sort of confirmed oligarchy. And I can say that because I don't work for y'all. I just wonder about it, if anybody else has thought about it. And when you think about the fact that mission in Washington, D.C. is very different. Any of you who've pastored around will know that pastoring a church in DC is very different from pastoring a church in Newark or pastoring a church down in Norfolk or pastoring a church in Baltimore or Philly. And so I'm just wondering about the perspective, you know.
Yeah.
Having said that, 3 cheers to Trevor. I wish him all the best.
Yes, they all do. But no, yeah, I mean, we depend on you to bring up these points, so it's all good. No love lost.
There was silence in heaven for the space of
Did you want us to respond to that?
Oh no!
I say, why not just have a second headquarters in the Maryland area or DC area?
Well, why do you need the second one when you have the first one?
Well, I don't know. Never mind.
Well, wasn't the original conference office in?
Started out in Maryland.
Yeah, started out. But we had all this wonderful land out here in PA. We couldn't turn
acres upon acres upon acres.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So who mentioned the heat? Because I just want to go back to this.
Yeah, it's hot out there. It's real.
Listen, the grass is brown because we haven't had rain, and the sun is like baking everything, including people.
Yeah.
Whew, this heat advisory stuff is no joke. My prayer.
Is it raining today? I thought we had some.
It's getting ready to rain any minute now.
Is it?
Yeah, any minute now it's going to rain.
I can't wait for that to happen.
I bet you can.
I'm actually looking forward to it as we come upon our camp meeting week starting this Friday. I'm looking forward to it being a little cooler. And I know that with all the camp meeting season, one of the conversations that comes up is that whole enclosed pavilion concept keeps resurfacing.
It seems that every other conference has an enclosed pavilion.
Most of them are moving that way. Yeah, they are. So.
Yeah.
Originally, our pavilion was to have been enclosed.
Yeah.
Originally, its original concept, the architectural drawings, shows it ultimately enclosed and having a second floor.
Wow. They ran out of material? Or?
I don't know. I don't know. It could have been ran out of interest.
And out of vision. Yeah, because money wasn't a problem for sure.
Right.
We are Allegheny East.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, we did it and people were okay with it. All right, so let's just, keep it this way.
Well, also it was built in the 70s, and maybe people didn't think air conditioning was all that big a deal in being enclosed. But now that we, our worship services have gotten a lot more sophisticated, and we're a lot more picky about bugs and heat and all of that. Looking at enclosure is a lot more exciting for people. And besides, if you're enclosed and, you have environmental controls and HVAC and all of that in there, you can actually use the place a lot more frequently than for just camp meeting. I mean, you could use it in the wintertime if it had heating. You could put in a permanent stage, permanent lighting, that sort of thing. So, it's something we can still do if the interest is there.
I know a guy who just got a job that if you talk to him, he might, maybe it will help him.
Yeah.
Listen, even though it's Arch had a door, it's time.
Even though it's Arch had a door.
It's time.
Yeah, that's true.
And a window.
And a window.
Yeah, so true. But we'll see. But yeah, we are looking forward to the camp meeting season for AEC starting on Friday. So we hope that some of you out there planning to join us here. If not during the week, at least the weekends come up. We have some fans. We have some upset fans for you.
Hey,
nice.
Yeah, we don't just have the pavilion this year. We have the tents.
Yeah, we have tents again. Yeah.
So don't let the pastor's labor be in vain.
Yeah, we have the teen tent. We have the young adult tent.
You trying to say something, Pastor G?
We worked our butts off to put up those tents. Y'all better show up.
So are you saying that the preaching for the young people will be intense?
I thought we were done with that
jokes. We need to the drum and cymbal.
That was quick.
Somebody said no more tents. They're boycotting the tents.
it's so funny how there's so many sides to this. Some people are like, no, it's classic.
I like the 10s.
You know, the problem is we're not baptizing enough Pathfinders. We need to get back to our roots. Okay? We need to
So they
get
can
back to our roots.
But no. All right, yeah, and check out our website for more about the lineup. But we do have some great speakers, great music.
Yeah.
So if there was a time to come, it's now. Somebody said they'll be in the car with the AC.
You know, as far as stories are going, did all of you hear about Louisiana passing the law that the Ten
Yeah.
Commandments had to be prominently displayed in all of their
Yeah.
public schools?
Yeah.
I was
January
curious.
1st.
Yeah. I was curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, how could a state that is 47th, ranked 47th in education, have that as a priority?
Mm.
Ah.
Yeah,
I think it's highly political.
That's
I
a
don't think
whole
it has
other
anything to do
podcast,
with
right?
I know. I was like,
That's a
religion.
whole show.
Whole nother.
Yeah.
that's a lot to unpack.
Do
yeah.
you think it's a good idea? I mean,
Mixing of church and state.
No, I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, in short, no.
No.
Yeah,
Sure.
I agree. I feel like
Can we
it's a
provide
setup.
lunch for the kids in school first? Like, aren't there other priorities to attend
Yeah,
to?
and decent lunches,
just make
not
a
hot
note.
dogs and pizza.
Adventist ministers do not like 10 Commandments. I'm good.
In public schools.
In public.
School.
Yeah.
I know, right? How many
Public
of us
citizens should
prayer
not
is next? You know,
commandments. Keen
God
on-
is not to be
I
forced.
understood. Okay.
you know how we kept saying they're taking prayer out of schools. You know, that's coming next. They're gonna have to take.
You're gonna bring the prayer back, right?
Yeah, they'll bring prayers.
When I was selected as the city's faith-based initiatives coordinator, a group of conservative Christians cornered me and said, "We want prayer back in schools. We really think that." And they gave me the whole ritual, and I explained to them. I said, "Well, you know that there's some things. No, we need it." I said, "Then you know we're going to do it. We'll have it. Next meeting we'll start." So the next meeting, when they all came together, I said, "Now let's stand for prayer." And I said, "Brother Imam, would you please offer a word of prayer for us?"
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He stood up,
Remember that?
and prayed a beautiful prayer, and closed with saying, "Amen." And they cornered me and said, I thought you said we were gonna have prayer." I said, "We just did." I said, "Next week I have a Buddhist monk coming." The argument ended after that.
Point taken.
Good illustration.
Inclusion. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's right. We're not ready. All right, guys. Well, it's time for us to jump into our topic for the evening. I'm sure most of us celebrated or at least acknowledged in some way Juneteenth this past Wednesday. It was so weird to have like a holiday in the middle of the week. I don't know about anybody else. It kind of threw me off.
Were you off, Tosh? Were you off?
Yes. Allegheny East Conference.
Federal holiday.
Wow.
Juneteenth on a
I mean,
Wednesday.
that conference office was empty.
That was technically because it was a federal holiday.
Yeah.
It's a federal holiday now, but Juneteenth has been celebrated for many years before now, before it became a
But
federal.
yeah, just 3 years. This is the third year, I believe, right?
Yep.
So, Keenan, open us up. What are we talking about tonight? We said Jesus
Sure.
and the gospel.
Sure, let's jump into it. Let me just read this, and I'm just going to throw out the questions to you all. Let's see what we got. I don't have no PowerPoint or anything like that today. So let me just read just a little history. Get you up to speed, just if anybody forgot. So Juneteenth commemorates the day Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1965 to announce the freedom of enslaved people.
1965.
Did I say 1965?
You said
That must have been my mic. 1865. 1865. Well, some people 1865 to announce the freedom of enslaved people over 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. This event highlights the prolonged struggle for freedom and justice for African Americans. So my question is to start off with you all. What do you think? Or can you all explain the historical significance, if there's any, of Juneteenth and why it's particularly important for the African American community?
It's freedom, man.
Well, I think personally it means a whole lot more than we're focusing on today.
Mm.
Um, in fact, in my opinion, I believe that Juneteenth is way more significant than any holiday or set aside time that we give and attribute to the struggle of African Americans in this country. I think that there's something we miss. I know I've missed in part of that celebration, and it's not only to celebrate. Officially, I think it was called Order Number 3 when they made that announcement in 1865. That slaves are free, so forth and so on. A lot happened after that, but I think the most significant thing that I've learned was that it wasn't so much a celebration of, slavery being abolished or whatever being illegal, the slaves are free. It was really meant to be a time when not only were the slaves set free, but it was also a signal for the slaves to say, now it's our time, it's our turn to be empowered and to build and to, have some of that the rest, America has. But, we have enough holidays, we have Black History Month that talk about the historical slave trade and all of that. But Juneteenth really, I think at least half of its focus is on what happened next. What happens next? What are we going to do next? Now that we're free, now what?
Mm.
And I think the focus was then, and I think it should be now. Okay, we all know about the slavery, but what do we do now?
Yeah.
What's the next step?
Still a very relevant question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if we have that answered yet.
The Juneteenth is one day out of a 6,000 plus year history that we're aware of, where a group of people were told that their freedom had been secured and that they now have the right to exercise their franchise as free citizens in the land that they lived in. But it links Black people. It doesn't separate us, but it links Black people to people throughout history who have been told or had to be told that they had been liberated. And foremost, for those of us who are Bible-believing Christians, is that it links us to the great day of Jubilee that is spoken of in the scripture, where God gives a law that says that no matter who you are, at some point in your life, you have to be set free. The day of Jubilee that was given through the Mosaic codes said that in the 50th year, every slave had to be given their freedom. Things that had been lost because of your mismanagement had to be given back to you, because God is always about giving freedom to people and giving them liberty. And so when you meet people who are always trying to confine, constrict, and prohibit, then you know that they're not of the Spirit of God. And so,
if you deep dive into slavery, and especially slavery before America, you'll understand that this may sound kind of crude, but if you look at it carefully, slavery is not racial.
No.
We think of it as being racial. Oh, white folk don't like Black folk and whatever. But if you really look at the global history of slavery, you'll find that even Africans enslaved Africans. That's not a popular thought, because we've been groomed to think that white people were the only slave owners, and that's not, before America, there was global slavery.
Yeah.
So it's the act of enslaving people is really what we should focus on.
Right. However, though, I think that with Juneteenth, just like Independence Day, and they call Juneteenth the second Independence Day, Freedom Day, just like 4th of July is something that's primarily for America. That's when this country got its independence. So yes, other countries had gotten their independence from before that, but Juneteenth is just a historical I think it has some significance just for people of this country, because I mean it is a big deal. If we celebrate the 4th of July, why not celebrate, Juneteenth? So yes, of course, there's history. It's slavery has been since the dawn age, since you have mankind. That's in Exodus. God talked about slavery with the Israelites, but chattel slavery is something a little different. I think something unique. Chattel slavery in America.
Well, one of the things you mentioned, the 4th of July, and I think somebody mentioned in the comment, it's such a well-known holiday. I remember as a kid celebrating the 4th of July. It was probably an adult before I even knew what Juneteenth was. I mean, to know that this happened 1865 and that the first one was celebrated in 1866, and there's still people to this day who are hearing about Juneteenth for the first time even this year. It shows one, how much our celebration of our freedom means in the scope of America. And it's almost like unless we make it a big thing, it won't be a big thing. I mean, unless we're celebrating it and bringing awareness to it, it's not going to be woven into the American story. Like it won't rise to the status of 4th of July unless we do something about that.
That's a great point. To Tasha's point and to Chuck's, for a long time there has been a minimization of that, or suppression of African American history. There's a lot that I've learned within the last 10 years that has simply blown my mind, and I'm still learning more about it. Of course, I went to the African American Museum a couple weeks ago, so I got to kind of revisit some of these talking points a little bit more. There was a unique emphasis to dehumanize these particular groups of people. Not only that, throughout history, we do see slaves eventually revolting and essentially fighting their way to freedom. But there was no way for African. Well, I shouldn't say there's no way. Most of the revolts were ineffective. So it was tough to really gain some type of advantage in the traditional way. So Juneteenth was a unique moment in history, a changing point in history, and a pivotal point, because I mean there's some people, allegedly, I don't know if I can confirm this, that there were some people who didn't want to leave their plantations. They didn't know what life would be like after slavery. Some of them became crop sharers, and so there is a battle, a conundrum of where do I go next? How do I identify myself in this new world? How do I live? How do I take care of myself? And so there's a lot to juggle with, and I think we're still kind of answering that question even today. Like, how do we move forward? How do we find our footing? How do we find healing? How do we move the goalpost forward?
Yeah, you make a good point there, because what came to mind was a green light. I think Juneteenth was the green light. We've been sitting under red lights and yellow lights for so long, so we finally got the green light, which means you can go. But as you said, Miggs, go where? At that time, go where? With what? But it did give us a green light of encouragement, because now we were empowered to go places we hadn't been before.
Yeah.
And therefore, the Black economy started to, a lot more education for Blacks, so forth and so on. But I think it's a good thing. While we look at history, it's also the spirit of moving forward. What's next is so important. Because we teach our children about Black history, but maybe not enough about going forward from there. Keenan, I want to ask you a question. From your study on this topic, when 1865 came along and General Order Number 3 was announced, and all slaves had been freed, how long did it take for that to sink in and actually start to happen, I'm sure there had to have been a period of time where it was like, it's almost like, you know, the slaves were saying, you're like, like the old sitcom, what you talking about, Willis? You know, no, free? Oh, really? So, I mean, was there a period of time, and did the country adapt it all at once, or was there a struggle with that?
That's a great question, Chuck. That I do not know, but we know after slavery came Reconstruction. In Reconstruction, a lot of blacks, they thrived. We all know that. And then the history, and then once Reconstruction ended, then that's when you had the Klan and all that stuff kind of came back with a vengeance, separation and everything. So that's a good question. I really don't know. But before anybody else jump, I just want to say this because Chuck, you said something earlier. You said that it's not a black or white thing. I just want to be just for this country though. For this country, slavery absolutely turned into a black and white thing. I'm from a state, I'm from Virginia. Well, I'm not from Virginia. I passed in Virginia right now. And some of you may have heard of Bacon's Rebellion. Anybody heard of Bacon's Rebellion? That's when the white indentured servants, he pretty much had paid the stuff off. He was ready to be free and get land. And he didn't get land. He burnt down like half of Virginia. And so eventually it's like we can't have just white people as slaves in partnering with the black people is not going to work. So let's create this separation. Okay, you're white. You could be like me one day. You could be a free white man, rich, but those black people could never be like us. And that separation, that spread like wildfire throughout the country. So this was definitely and if anybody just look at Bacon's Rebellion, it definitely led to it, slavery definitely being, about race.
So I'm still stuck back on the idea of moving forward, but have we really wrestled with the reality of how far removed we are from our history in Africa? So how do we wrestle with that moving forward, healing, while we're somewhat removed from our true self and identity? So how do we wrestle with these realities while we're trying to move forward?
Education. It's got to start with education. There's even, I things I'm finding out now, I really felt I should have known 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. The information was there, but it was suppressed. It was hidden. Now we're starting to dig up things, and we're starting to have those aha moments. And this holiday is the perfect time to bring those aha moments to fruition by saying, wait a minute, we know what our history is. It saddens us, but it just does give us a base for moving forward. Let's talk about moving forward, and I mean in the sense like Tulsa. To me, that was moving forward. In fact, moving forward so well, a lot of white folk didn't like that. They said, whoa, take it easy. You guys have businesses, museums, and libraries? Oh,
more money than us.
We can't let that happen. But Juneteenth was the green light and the catalyst of that, the catalyst of Tulsa.
So Chuck, with
that we can move ahead.
So Chuck, with that being said, Marlena.
I wanted to say that because of the lack of information for us as a people, knowing our past, today there's so much more suppression though when they don't want certain books to be read and taught in schools. I remember Wednesday a black person saying there was a program on June 10th, and the black person said, I don't want to go see that mess, right? And I thought, that's about our history, right? And so I think we bought into the stories that other people tell us, where we're no longer even interested in our own history most of the time. And so, they're not going to get it in the education system. We see that's diminishing in multiple states. So it has to be education taught maybe on the church level, on the community, maybe to teach people, but it's really something when we don't want to know our own history and our own heritage. And then did you hear recently they're talking about Martin Luther King? It was all just a hoax, you know.
Oh gosh.
That's what it was, just a hoax, right? It really didn't. It wasn't
A
nothing,
hoax?
right?
How,
Yeah,
how
like,
was it a hoax?
Well, there was.
Did they unpack that? Because if someone said to me, "Oh, it was a hoax," please unpack it. I mean, you're beginning to sound like we didn't land on the moon. It's all faked in a studio. Okay, it was a hoax. How?
Telling what they say.
Well,
So,
I just wanted to see if I can elevate another part of this discussion, and that is, it's not simply Juneteenth. This is Juneteenth and the gospel. Am I correct in
Yeah,
that?
I was getting there. You jumping ahead there. Yes. Yeah,
Well, we're only halfway through. I didn't mean to jump ahead.
yeah. But I just want to say this before we get there, because Jesus is our ultimate liberator, absolutely. But just we didn't tackle this. How should we celebrate? If we're celebrating Juneteenth, how should we celebrate? Because Chuck mentioned education. What should we do? We still trying to. Does anybody figure that out?
Tally, you can speak. I understand that Philadelphia is one of the major places where there are celebrations.
Oh,
What
yeah.
kind of celebrations are taking place in Philadelphia? I mean, in fact, that's globally. When people think of Juneteenth and Philadelphia, it's like, whoa, yeah, they really go out and make it a big deal. So,
Yeah.
can you elaborate on that?
There were. I actually saw fireworks yesterday in this place, but I mean, there were several gatherings where you had artistic presentations, spoken word, music. Of course, Black people, whenever they come together, I don't care if they're atheists, they're going to have a gospel choir.
yeah.
And so somebody's going to be out there busting a lung,
Jesus set us free.
and so you had that, and then there were a couple of one of my friends who is more Afrocentric had an educational day where there was really study given and presentations that help people understand what went into the enslavement of African people and what it took to reverse that through an act of legislation. So Philadelphia is a hub of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think we should have programs that tell the story. In the Bible, they would set stones, right? At
Yeah.
certain places to remind the people of what happened, right? So you never lose the story. And I think we should have programs that tell the story of what happened so that we do not forget. And it's a
Yeah,
time of celebration.
I agree
Yeah.
with you. And we need to start with our Black educators.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our Black educators are getting chastised, for deep diving and sharing with their students the truth about the history of Black Americans. But I really think that it should start with, and it may have already started with, our Black educators being re-educated to educate their students.
Mm-hmm. And even in our churches, I mean, I think for our context, I know churches can't do everything. We've talked about that before, but I do think it's important, even in our churches, to affirm the holidays, mention it. That could be one of the nuggets. Something to highlight it in spaces, particularly in Black churches, where it affects those people. Because I do feel like sometimes we just assume people are getting it elsewhere. That may not be the case. So I think the church is a great opportunity, not just for the education, but also the celebration piece of it. A lot of times our churches will have International Day or, cultural day around other, what we consider Afrocentric holidays. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to do something like that in our churches as well. Make it a big deal.
I can see, in light of our call, pertaining to the gospel, of helping people to recognize that there is a future, right? And I think, well, as we're discussing, I'm thinking of those who are, coming out of the, penitentiary system, providing services for them on that day or around that day to provide, let's build a resume. Let's show you how to build, your credit. Let's Let's get you back on your feet so that you
Mm.
understand where you're going. We know where you've been.
Mhm.
We're clear on that, and the world around you will forever remind you of where you've been. But let's create some plans on how you can move forward. Let's reach out. Not, that's one part of our population. Let's speak to those who are recently divorced, who are just getting back on their feet, and they may not have the hope of a bright future, and reminding them that, listen, this is just a moment in time.
Mhm.
Let's leave this stone here, like Marlena was saying. Let's leave this one here, and let's figure out how to move forward. Let's create that plan for that single mother who's getting back on her feet after, or divorced man who may have lost everything in his divorce, whatever the case may be. Let's figure out how we can be the bridge between where they've been and where God would want them to go.
Amen.
And that'll
And
be a
I
great
want
plan.
to add, and we need to teach people what oppression still is.
Yeah,
Because there's a lot now.
yeah.
And some of us are so flim flam, we don't even know when we're being
Yeah.
oppressed, like what Ebony was talking about with black businesses, especially black businesses by women, black women, black owned businesses
Mhm,
by black women. I mean, there was like we get approved less than point 0.1 or 0.01 percentages of loans,
Mhm.
and they try to keep that oppression going. And so when I hear other people say, it's not a country of inequality, I
mm,
was like, are you crazy? Right?
mhm,
You don't know what oppression is. So I think we need to teach that as well.
Yeah.
So when we talk about Juneteenth and the liberation of Black people, do we contextualize it with white supremacy and the issue of race and racism?
Hmm.
say
Yeah,
more.
in this country, yes.
Yeah.
In
I
this
mean,
country, yes.
Juneteenth. Yes.
Yeah,
You should.
I just love the setup.
I
Just,
felt it
Yeah,
We
coming.
don't
No,
feel that.
that's why I'm like, no, I'm not
Well, we're
giving it.
still ready. We're still
Yeah, I
ready.
mean, I think, come on, Juneteenth. It's a holiday for a
yeah,
holiday that is American history. It's
yeah,
American
Yeah,
history.
yeah.
yeah.
You
And I mean,
know.
but in the context of racism and white
Mhm,
supremacy subjecting Black people to
Mhm.
to
mhm.
the over the overlordship of white people who deemed themselves to be supreme,
Right.
Mm.
right?
In this
Absolutely.
country, in our early history, absolutely. But when you
Absolutely.
look globally, the same mindset of slavery,
I'm looking at Tasha. Tasha just waiting for the other
not
shoe
only
to fall.
there, not only
Yeah.
that,
Don't be
but
afraid, Tosh. Don't be
I,
afraid.
I, I realized in my study on this topic that, and I want to do a slight shift. Uh, the Emancipation Proclamation was before Juneteenth.
Mm.
You know what it says? Every man is, created equal, so forth and so on. Okay, that was in our part of America.
Mhm.
Okay, so I want to focus, if I may, Keenan and Tally specifically, because you're leading in the topic, and of course you have a rich background on
I'm
biblical.
I'm an outside agitator.
Yeah, you're a mercenary now. The word emancipation,
Mm.
can we pivot that to a biblical perspective? Being emancipated is what?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me read a text. Can I just read a text since
Mhm.
you brought it up from Jesus' first sermon there, Tally?
Hmm.
And Jesus says he quotes Isaiah, but the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has have anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He have sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind. And I like the last part. It says to set at liberty them that are oppressed,
Mm,
to
mm,
preach the acceptable year
I
of
don't
the
see
Lord.
any
mhm,
no race in there. Darn it.
mm,
Right,
mhm,
right. I mean, freedom is a universal thing, right? Jesus is
mhm,
our chief liberator. He wants freedom for all,
The
right? So
reason the
yeah,
reason I asked that question is because when Juneteenth came along and when people were told that they were liberated, a lot of the slaves who were liberated had to go tell their black masters that they were free.
That's right.
There were thousands
Hmm.
of individuals who were people of color who owned other people of color.
Hmm.
And that was one of the reasons I was saying that it is necessary for us to connect this to the larger context of the willingness of some human beings to oppress other human beings
Correct.
for the sake of advantage, and not to simply allow it to
Hmm.
become a story of race writ America style.
Hmm.
But it's
And
both.
even if you do it
It
that way,
has become
But
that.
it is,
over
but
the-
it should be because it's an American holiday. So why wouldn't it?
well, no, what I'm saying is, we remember now the topic is Juneteenth and the gospel. You remember, you remember the gospel, but
Mhm.
and so the idea is to, I mean, because what happens is it gets to the point where as black people we see it as a way of kind of shaking our fists in the face of the white overlordship of this country. And we see slavery as something that white people did to black people when it is actually a part of a larger story that the
Absolutely.
gospel attacks, which is the
Hmm.
fact that people should be free, and that the task of a Christian is to learn how to liberate people, to help them find freedom, and to not bind them. Jesus said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you bind burdens on men. And sometimes, even from our Christian perspective, we are binding people
That's right.
rather than liberating people. And that's why I was saying, that's why I was wanting to see what we would do when we got to that Juneteenth and the gospel part. How
Well,
do we preach that?
yeah, and when you kind of maybe set aside the racial part of the racial interpretation of slavery, but you have to remember in American history we oppressed Japanese.
We did. We did.
We put them in
Indians too
Determined.
what
much.
amounted to
East
concentration camps.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the indigenous people of this continent.
What we
Same
did
thing.
to them was unconscionable.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
America.
And that's
Land of the
human.
free and home of the
Yeah,
brave.
I think that's what Tally's trying to say. That there's a larger context. That there's a human
Yeah.
default that looks to destroy and I think that's a sin condition, right? That seeks to minimize and there's that power dynamic that's at play. So it's not to slap a particular color to it, but to speak to it universally. Whether that's, well, Pastor Tally, forget, I'm not speaking for you, but this is what I heard from you.
Speak for me, because I need help. Help me.
But
Still
I mean,
say
we had
that's
the
on a
conversation
larger
yesterday.
scale.
Yeah, there's a bigger, there are multiple issues, and on a very smaller scale. Just yesterday, we were having a group conversation about the burdens of the Sabbath and the boundaries that we've or the extra rules that we've tacked on to the Sabbath, right? Just showing up to church. If you're a regular member and you show up one week in shorts and some sandals, people will look at you sideways because you're not following the Sabbath rules. I knew growing up, God forbid we picked up a ball or we decided to ride a bike or to laugh too long. There's clearly a problem because the Sabbath was not meant for our enjoyment. We'd have these conversations in church about what you can do and can't do on the Sabbath, to the point where it does become a level of constraint. And I'm sure we can pinpoint some other ways in our society, outside of, and this is not to say that what happened historically here should be cast aside, but there's a broader picture to speak to the freedom of humanity on multiple fronts. And I think this could be that moment of pivoting. And I think Gaston asked about how do we bridge the gap when we're detached from our history. There's some things that we may not be able to recover, but a part of this Juneteenth celebration, of course, is looking forward, being able to bridge the gap and to reach people across the island, to reach different cultures and ethnic groups, and to be a part of their fight and to be an encouragement for them as well as they're dealing with their own oppressors, whatever that might look like. And to be honest, when you look globally, most of the oppressors look like the ones that they're oppressing.
Mhm.
Right now, Migs, the 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 landmass with the greatest number of enslavers is Africa.
Mm-hmm.
It has been quoted that there's approximately 9 million Africans enslaved by other Africans.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, you have the same thing in Asia, and as Miggs was saying, typically the oppressor looks just like those who are being oppressed. What made American slavery so different was that it was defined by race, but the idea is how do you free people from being defined by their oppression? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and when you constantly, for example, when I hear a black person say, my grandparents were slaves. No, they were enslaved. But if I'm constantly defined by what somebody else did to me, I am still not free. And that's why I speak about Juneteenth and the gospel. It links the experience of what black people went through, which is just a blip on
Mm.
the continuum of world history.
Humanity, yeah.
It
Mm-hmm.
links us to the continual attempt of the Spirit of the living God to demonstrate that human beings made in the image of God are to be free.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And Jesus, when he came and he preached that sermon, I shouldn't be saying this, 'cause I'm going to be preaching this in a couple of days. When he preached that sermon, folks loved it at first. By the time he got to the end, they tried to kill him
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
because it messed with their definition of themselves. Tune in a little bit later this week, and I'll give you the rest of that one. But
I'll be
I,
there tomorrow.
You do such a good impression of it. It's really good.
when I'm hearing you talk about this, I'm thinking about, when we look at sin as bondage,
yeah,
and we look at how we try to put sin in categories, like, this sin is worse. Oh, yeah, because I'm hearing how we're saying, there are different groups of people who experience slavery,
Mhm.
who were enslaved. And there are some of us, and I get it, it's our experience as our people, so we feel that part probably a little bit more than others. So that's our
Mhm.
talking point, that's our jumping off point.
mhm,
But it
mhm.
doesn't negate the fact that every form of slavery is bad. And
Yeah.
and it's that parallel with sin is that sometimes we do that with this bondage of sin. We say, oh, if you commit this sin, that's real
Right.
slavery. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But this one is, nah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not.
All
White
you
lie.
did was lied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
When in fact,
Yeah.
to truly be free, sin has to, be eradicated from our lives, just like slavery. So I'm seeing a lot of the parallels more as we're having this discussion between
Mhm.
how
Right.
we view slavery and how we're slave to sin as well.
Right.
So what I
And
hear you
that's what I say.
saying, Callie, is that Jesus dealt with the act of slavery and not so much the racial component of slavery.
Even yeah, I mean that's it. But even greater than that, he dealt with the human motivation that would lead one human being to
Mhm.
perceive that they had the prerogative to enslave another.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and this is what his miracles is about. He told them, he said one time, "You untie your donkeys, but yet you are upset with me because I set this daughter of Abraham free on the Sabbath."
Mm,
I
Mm.
mean, there's a thirst on the part of God
Mhm.
to deliver people from bondage.
Hmm.
yeah.
And so when we say slavery, Juneteenth is a historical fact, and there are historical factors that are part of it.
Yeah.
But when we talk about Juneteenth in the gospel, if we immediately, when we hear the word slavery, we immediately think of somebody in a cotton field singing, "I've been buked and I've been scorned,"
Mm.
then you need to enlarge your view of what slavery means, because slavery is much bigger than simply the story that I can own a part of it. And that's what the
And,
gospel tells us to do.
and Tally, I think that we could walk and chew gum at the same time. I think that we could definitely focus on, we celebrating freedom of African Americans in this country. You could focus on that and still, focus on a larger context of Jesus
Oh
freeing us
yeah.
from sin. And I think too often, at least what I'm hearing right here on this podcast, is that, well, we focus on this one, then we're negating the other.
No,
I don't think
I
that
hope
we,
I hope I'm not being heard that way. I'm simply
yeah,
saying when you say Juneteenth and the gospel,
yeah. Mhm.
you have to make sure that emphasis is on the gospel lens through which you would view what Juneteenth is.
and that's freedom, right? It comes down to freedom.
It
That's
is
the main
freedom,
thing.
liberty.
Yeah, liberty. But I just want to. So at my church, what we do at my church, at least at Cedars of Lebanon for Juneteenth, we've been trying to do this for the last couple of years. It's been hit and miss. This year was kind of we experimented. We tried to do it on the Sabbath, but because we didn't want to do it on the next day, which was Father's Day. We wanted to give dads their time. But we have bounce houses. We didn't do that this year. We did it the year before. We had arts and crafts for the kids. We had somebody do something, give like little poem on history, try to educate the people. So we tried to make sure that we're doing something on that day because it is a holiday. We should celebrate it. So I think that everybody and my neighbor. So my neighbor and I, we started last year. And we try to get our whole community, just have a community barbecue, on Juneteenth. And this year we were both tired. He texted me, "Hey, you ready?" I like, "You ready?" So we waited too late, and then we just didn't do anything, at least for our community. But next year we're gonna try to make sure we do something special, just to celebrate. Why not?
I think we should really be intentional about teaching our young people about from a biblical perspective first, about what slavery really means, and then talk about the ways in which the adversary helps us carry out slavery, because there are some who believe that you can be enslaved in the church or by the church.
Oh, yeah.
You don't like to put, some people say, well, isn't that oxymoron? Isn't that what slave and church? No, that's not supposed to be, but it does happen. I believe that slavery is a tool of the adversary, and he will interpret it any way he feels like. And we, unfortunately, we follow along with it. We enslave. There are family members who enslave other family members.
Mercy.
Yeah.
You can't go unless I say you can go. When you're talking about domestic abuse, that's a type of slavery.
There is no greater bondage than when somebody says, "I am holding you because God told me to." I mean, and religious enslavement is, that the whole gospel, the whole presentation of Christ in the gospel was, remember now, when Jesus preached, he almost 99% of the time was speaking to people who were supposed to be the free children of Abraham. He wasn't going out to, Rome and everywhere else. He was talking to folks. And one time they said, "We ain't never been enslaved," the Pharisee said to him in John chapter 8. And that's when he said, you have your daddy, the devil. But the fact of the matter is that the gospel should liberate. And many times in our churches, we find ways to bind people. And here's the greater part of that. The Bible is not the best source when it comes to teaching liberation all the time. Not all of it. When you can talk about Abraham and how wonderful he is, and he takes a girl out of Egypt and impregnates her, and then when they get upset with her, throws her out into the woods and says, "Look, you're gonna be all right, baby. Just here's some water and here's some bread. Just start to step it." That's a horrible thing. That's a horrible.
And a type of action like that still took place in this country with slave owners impregnating their slaves.
Indeed.
So that action can continued on in actuality.
And I have problems with the Apostle Paul. When Paul's, can you pull up Winston? Yeah. When Paul sent Philemon back to Onesimus, I have a problem with that. And for those who don't know the story, the book of Philemon is about a runaway slave who's a Christian, whose master is also a Christian. And Paul says, "Go back to your master, submit yourself to him." I have a problem with that. Does anybody else have a problem with that with me? Yep. All of you Juneteenth celebrators? Anybody else have a problem with that with me?
I don't have a problem with it.
See, that's why I love Keenan.
The reason why I don't, the reason why I don't have a problem with it, because Paul of course, he was inspired by the Holy Spirit to write that for one. Um, and he dismantled. If you look at what he said to Philemon and
Mm-hmm.
the other guy, he pretty much treat him like a brother. Treat him like a brother. So if you treat your slave like a brother, you will dismantle slavery. But he was smart enough to know if he just said, hey, you can't have slaves, in that time, Rome, he would have been executed right there on the spot for writing that. So he undermining it by saying treat him like a brother. So that's why I have a problem with that.
Tally, I just got a question. Are you uncomfortable when Jesus advised the oppressed to turn the other cheek?
No. Because I'm clear on what Jesus is saying, which is to seek reconciliation before you seek revenge. I'm clear on that.
Okay.
But when much of and I've look, when I say I'm uncomfortable with it, I am not at all saying don't read Paul. I'm simply saying that because people are creatures of their context and their times, there are times, GP, you sent it to me that this Dr. Letson did an extraordinary speech about how to read the scriptures with a lens that allows you to properly and rightly divide it. For example, when the Apostle Paul says, a woman, she shouldn't, I suffer not a woman to have any authority over a man. Marlena and Tasha, is that okay with y'all?
You know my answer, sir. You know.
I want to hear it on the radio.
You know that is not right.
Happy with that. Yeah.
What'd you say, Tasha? What'd you say?
No, I'm not. That doesn't rest well with me. No.
Okay. And that's what I mean by, because the Bible accepts slavery, even though Jesus preached liberty and freedom. But the gospel finds itself at times wrestling with the context in which it is being preached. And sometimes you have to move slowly. You have to take it a step at a time. Havis told me to put it in context. The context was that slavery was a part of life. And Paul was trying to make the situation as best he could. But I still have a problem with it. And that's because I live in 2024.
Right.
Yeah.
And Paul lived back then.
Yeah.
Right. No, I understand what you're saying.
But when I see Paul,
Now, we've also seen
you talk that stuff in North Philadelphia, man. You've been some tent somewhere else, brother.
we've also seen a different version of slavery. I don't know what Paul may have witnessed, but our context and our history with slavery might be a little bit different than what Paul experienced during that time. And so it is tough for me to read some of those scriptures, or even reading through Genesis and seeing how Abraham's wealth grew exponentially, and a part of that was counting his slaves. Right. It's tough to imagine. Even we talk about Hagar, the fact that she had no choice in deciding if she wanted Ishmael. That wasn't she was not a part of that conversation. Right. Those are some uncomfortable texts that, Tally, I have to question God. Like, why allow this? Why record it in this particular way?
That last statement was made by Pastor Miggs. We question God.
I mean,
I just thought I'd say that.
I think Tally,
I don't want to die.
That's all right.
I think I may have seen a bolt of lightning flash there on your
rain up here,
Did
Miggs.
anybody else see that?
Just
Did
remember,
anybody-
God always gives freedom of choice. Just remember.
Very, very true. Very true.
Well,
but in the writing of the Bible, there are some themes that are uncomfortable to manage, and we have to wrestle with those from time to time. So for that particular passage, when I first read it, it didn't bother me, but as I got older, it didn't settle right in my spirit. There's so many different ways to pronounce it. Philemon.
yeah.
Oh, you
Philemon.
pronounce it with
You said
authority,
Lamon.
man. However, if you pronounce it with authority, everybody will say it the way you said it.
Steak, filet mignon.
Philemon sounded like.
I mean, you can say
Filet
I'm
mignon.
filet mignon, and that's what they call them.
Philemon. I like Philemon. I don't know.
But it is. I mean, Havis and Winston we're talking about it. The only point, the point that I'm really trying to drive is that the gospel is always trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to liberate people.
Yeah.
Mm,
And it pushes hard against custom and culture and tradition. I mean, think about it. The 10 Commandments embraces and accepts slavery.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy male slave, nor thy female slave. It embraces it. It accepts it. I mean, if I'm writing the Bible, I'm saying, let him go. Dad gummit. That's what I'm saying.
yeah, this
But,
is
but what God did was he put a law in that
Mhm.
taught them that every human being should know freedom.
Mhm.
And hopefully they would learn from that. Now they didn't, because we like our advantages and we like our privileges and we like our entitlements. But I mean, Black people, you would think that in Africa, Juneteenth would be every day, but you've got 9 million people enslaved in Africa right now.
Mm.
That's right.
But Tally, even to that point, now you talked about the Sabbath. Leviticus 25 speaks of a God's other form of Sabbath in terms of releasing land back to its rightful owners, releasing slaves after a certain point in time. So even within what God allows, not saying that God wanted these things to happen, there was no perpetual indebtedness, no perpetual slavery, no
Exactly.
perpetual poverty. So everything has to kind of reset after a particular point in time. But even in our Juneteenth celebration, we have to also recognize historically, even past that point, how this system has been persistent in ensuring that Black people specifically do not get a leg forward. Do not get step forward. Do not progress at any point. So every example we have of a flourishing Black society just so happens to have been destroyed, burnt down, or whatever the case may be. You're intentional about trying to tear down in the minds of Black people in America that progress is not ours. So Juneteenth is a declaration, is that pivotal point where we're saying we're going to take that back now. We're going to take some of that back. We're going to pour back into our people and let them know that, listen, the future is ours. The future is ours. We have the power. It is God's will that we do some amazing things on this earth.
Yeah.
Well, just as Tally brought out that there is still enslavement on the continent of Africa. Let me ask the question, and makes to you, or maybe Keenan, the Black culture, the Black in America, are we enslaving ourselves?
Mm.
And if we are, how are we doing that?
That's a tough
Just a
question.
question. Do we carry out the act of oppression amongst our own people?
Yeah, well, I think evil is universal, as we've been saying. So sin, no matter what your color is, the spirit of Satan or Lucifer, he's like, if I be lifted up, he wanted power. He always wanted to be above, on top, the Lord over somebody. When Jesus, he came down, he humbled himself. So I think in any human interaction, the enemy is lurking to put yourself over somebody. In every sphere of influence, every interaction, husband, wife, anything, any interaction. So I think, yes, absolutely.
Colorism.
Absolutely. Everything.
Well,
Yeah, very much
Post-traumatic
so.
slave syndrome.
What was that, GP?
I said post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Sure, you agree there.
Yeah.
But I think back to when the Million Man March was being planned, and Black Adventist ministers said, you should not go. Now, white Adventist ministers, they were definitely opposed. But Black Adventist ministers said you shouldn't go because it's being led by Louis Farrakhan, and he's a Muslim, and this is not a Christian thing, and you shouldn't go. That was when I knew I was going. That's when I knew I was going.
Mhm.
You know,
It was at that moment.
in
Yeah,
there,
I went to the second one,
Mhm.
and to cover it, and I can tell you, I got an education that day. It was one of the most fabulous civil educational experiences I ever had.
Mm.
To this day, it remains the most significant public event I have ever attended.
Wow.
I mean, it was an extraordinary, but ignorance told well-meaning people to tell me that I shouldn't be there. They would have captured me and prohibited me and stolen my freedom to be amongst a million of my own brethren
Mm-hmm.
to celebrate my identity and my freedom.
Mm.
And that would have enslaved me. And we do that in our churches all the time.
Well,
Last thing I'll say.
What do you say to those who will say,
Go ahead.
in Christ, we are neither black nor white, male nor female, Greek nor Jew? What do you say to those folks who say that we should just kind of, as when we're under the blood, that we're all
Colorblind.
one? Yeah.
I
How do
ask them,
we
what do you do when you
maintain?
get to what do you do when you get to a traffic light? You know?
I say I'm colorblind.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a serious danger right there.
Yeah.
To call the whole colorblind. I don't see black. I don't see white. Because there are a lot of people who do, and they use that against you.
Yeah.
So you better make sure that there's nothing wrong with telling the truth. Just call it what it is, and let's still see people humanity, but we got to call it out. We got to call out sin for what it is. At least that's what
But isn't the point of the text, in Christ we are all equal? We should not lord over each other.
we should.
Yeah.
GP, clearly you went to school with the colored folks. We don't like your version of the Bible. Okay, I don't like your interpretation.
Well, guys.
well, my final statement is that it's education and education, and let's change the narrative, even amongst ourselves, how we talk about ourselves, how we share the history of ourselves, and about general being proud of being a Black American, because it's another show. But if you go to other ethnic groups, someone that has a Cuban heritage, okay, they're born in America, but the parents say we're Cuban. They are Cuban Americans. They're Cuban. In other words, in their description, they capture and hold their heritage. We need to learn, we need to teach our young people in an effort to, even the playing field by allowing all ethnic groups to honor and capture their legacy and still be American.
This is true, guys. I was looking at going back to the scripture, John 8:36, because as we're talking about the reality of slavery in America and globally, it makes me feel, not that we shouldn't fight for our freedoms and recognize but it just reminded me that the only true freedom that we will experience will be that we experience from Jesus Christ. So who the Son sets free is free indeed. I think, to me, that's the baseline. Meaning, even as people were in slavery, their hope, what got them over, is knowing that one day, because they believed, they would truly be free. Even though they never experienced it in their lifetime, even though they prayed for it, they worked for it, but they had a freedom. They had the freedom that really matters. And I'm hoping that as we fight for causes, as we do our job to, fight for our rights, that we don't forget to strive for that ultimate freedom that only comes from accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Only truly then will we know what freedom is.
Let me put a little oil, ordain that woman.
Yeah, and there's a sermon out there that somebody has been going around the internet, and someone has said that social justice and the gospel should be separate. But I just want to tell everybody, and this will be my last statement, that social justice, that is the gospel.
Yeah,
It is the gospel.
No.
Right. Jesus was a liberator.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and on the other side, some people wanted social justice. Like they want to fight for everything here, but they don't care about the other stuff. Like they don't care about where we end up after, or they don't care about our soul. So I think you're right. They can be separated. They is both and when it comes to.
Oh, no, I hear you. Yeah.
At least crazy.
Yeah. They don't care about your soul. Yeah.
Oh man, just don't want us to get it twisted. All right, guys. Well, this has been a great conversation. Part of the upset, what we want to do is bring to the forefront issues and topics that we feel sometimes are not talked about enough. This is what this platform is about. So I appreciate you all engaging in this dialogue about Juneteenth and the gospel. And I hope that we took something away from this conversation and are already thinking about how we're going to be more intentional as we lead up to the next one to celebrate it properly.
Now, just before we close, just to be clear, I'm not the new president.
Who's going to break it on?
Your house.
No, Tally, not this time, okay?
Man.
Not this time. Not this time. No, I wonder if I have to go get clearance for you to still be here now. No, I was playing.
Thank you, Havis.
Thank
you, Winston.
In all seriousness, we need to send up a word of prayer for our new president.
True.
Because
Absolutely.
taking on a position like that is a major shift in life.
His life has changed. Yes.
Very much so. And it can be very taxing.
Yeah, I don't envy.
Give him all the support that we can. Keep him in prayer. There are people that are excited. Oh, he's young. Yeah, but he has a family and he has other, interests in his life. And this can be a very taxing job for him. So let's just keep him in prayer.
Absolutely. Let's pray for him.
And Havis, you're right.
Oh, he said you're too opinionated. No, not Tally. Come on.
Too opinionated to be president.
They need
All right, guys.
more action.
Keenan, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for leading us.
Yes.
So next time, guys, we're going to see you guys at camp meeting live.
Yeah.
Live.
Yeah, we are
Right,
here.
live
Yeah,
audience.
me. Wow.
Yeah, we're here next Sunday. We'll be live from the pavilion. I think is our plan. We'll be live from the pavilion.
If it's as hot as it is today, we're going to be live and sweating.
Our fans. Yeah, and make sure you come out to the live audience. We'll have a little upset fan for you. We have a limited supply, so those who join us, we'll get them. Yes, yes. Thank you.
And I think Tally will have a lemonade stand there somewhere.
Tally won't even come.
She knows me well.
Come on, guys. Let's make sure Tally gets there. Somebody, somehow, some way. All right, everyone. Thanks again for a great discussion. Thank you to our audience. We appreciate your comments as always in the chat. Thanks for engaging us and
like and share.
Yes, let's keep this conversation going. All right, guys. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Take care. Because if it's Sunday.
Now you want to say it.
It's time to go.
We're still working on that. Take care, guys.
Take care.